The lobby of the Grand Oak Residences was polished marble and glass, a place where wealthy residents believed they owned not just their apartments, but the very air inside the building. Every morning, when the automatic doors slid open, a man in a faded navy blue uniform walked in quietly. His name was Samuel Rivera, the janitor. Samuel was in his late 50s, his back slightly curved from years of hard work, his hands worn and calloused from scrubbing floors and carrying heavy bags of trash. He didn't speak much. He just nodded politely when greeted. Most residents never even bothered to remember his name. To them, he was invisible, or worse, a target of casual jokes whispered behind expensive sunglasses. Careful. Don't end up like Samuel, mopping floors your whole life. One young man once laughed to his friends in the elevator, while Samuel stood silently just 3 feet away. They chuckled, not even lowering their voices as if his feelings didn't exist. Children sometimes mimicked his limp when he walked. Teenagers threw candy wrappers on the ground just to watch him pick them up, and even adults rolled their eyes when he passed by with his mop and bucket. To everyone in that building, Samuel was nothing more than the janitor. But what no one knew, not the arrogant residents, not the gossiping doormen, not even the condo board, was that behind Samuel's quiet eyes and slow movements, there was a truth powerful enough to turn their world upside down. Because Samuel was not who they thought he was. And the day was coming when the secret he carried would finally be revealed. The hallways of the Grand Oak Residences echoed with wealth. Designer shoes clicked against marble floors, perfume lingered in the elevators, and conversations revolved around stocks, vacations, and new cars. In that world of polished surfaces, Samuel Rivera was a shadow, moving silently with his mop, his cart, and his tired eyes. The residents never saw him as a man. To them, Samuel was a background character in their perfect lives, the kind of person you didn't look at twice. And because of that, cruelty came easily. Samuel, don't miss a spot. My dog's paws deserve clean floors, Mrs. Langley, a wealthy widow draped in diamonds, once barked as she let her poodle run across the freshly mopped lobby. The little dog left wet footprints everywhere. Samuel quietly bent down, wiped the floor again, and whispered, "Yes, ma'am," without meeting her eyes. Teenagers were worse. They lingered near the gym entrance, sipping energy drinks, tossing the cans on the ground. "Oops, janitor duty," one laughed as Samuel bent to pick it up. The others giggled, snapping photos of him with their phones. Later, he found his picture on a social media post with the caption, "Grand Oak's Eternal Mop Master." Hundreds of laughing emojis followed. Even some of the doormen joined in. "Careful, Sam," one teased. "If you work too hard, maybe the building will promote you to chief trash collector." The laughter echoed through the lobby, but Samuel just gave a small smile and kept moving. Yet behind that quiet smile, his heart carried the weight of every insult. When he returned to his small, dimly lit apartment on the edge of the city, he sat at the kitchen table with his calloused hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. In the silence, the voices replayed in his mind. "Mop master, janitor duty, don't miss a spot." Each word cut deeper than the last. He stared at an old photograph taped to the refrigerator, a younger Samuel, standing proudly in front of a building with a group of men in suits. His eyes were brighter then, his shoulders straighter. That photo was a reminder of the life he once had, the truth no one at Grand Oak could imagine. But Samuel kept that truth buried. To the world inside the condominium, he was nothing more than the janitor. And for now, that was exactly how he wanted it. The sun had barely set, and the lobby of the Grand Oak Residences glowed with warm golden lights. Residents gathered near the entrance, waiting for their luxury cars to pull up. It was the perfect scene for polished shoes, expensive watches, and careless laughter that bounced off the marble walls. Among them was Jason Miller, a 32-year-old real estate broker who carried himself like he owned the entire building. Jason was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, and never missed an opportunity to remind others of his success. His voice carried across the lobby, loud enough for everyone to hear, as if the world itself were his audience. And that night, his audience included Samuel Rivera, who had just stepped out of the maintenance closet with his mop and bucket. Samuel's uniform, faded and slightly too big, contrasted sharply with Jason's designer attire. "Look, everybody!" Jason's voice rang out, a smirk spreading across his face. "Here comes our building's hero. Without him, where would we be? Probably drowning in dust and trash, right?" The group around Jason chuckled. Mrs. Langley, clutching her jeweled handbag, gave a dry laugh. "Oh, Jason, don't be cruel. He's just doing his job." But Jason wasn't done. He stepped closer to Samuel, eyes narrowing as though studying a specimen. "Tell me, Samuel, do you ever dream of something bigger? Or is this," he gestured at the mop, "the highlight of your life?" The laughter grew louder. A few teenagers pulled out their phones, ready to capture the moment. The janitor, standing silently with his mop in hand, felt the heat rising in his chest. His lips pressed together, but his eyes betrayed the storm brewing inside. Jason leaned in even closer, lowering his voice just enough for those nearby to hear. "Men like me? We build towers, close deals worth millions. And men like you clean up after us. That's the balance of the world, Samuel. Don't forget it." For a moment, the entire lobby fell into a tense silence, waiting for Samuel's response. But he didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself. He simply straightened his shoulders, looked Jason in the eye, and said softly, "I never forget." Jason scoffed, rolling his eyes. "See, even the janitor agrees with me." He raised his arms as if he had won some kind of performance, and the laughter returned. Samuel turned away, his heart pounding, each step heavier than the last. Behind him, the mocking echoes of Jason's words clung to the polished marble walls. But deep inside, Samuel carried something Jason could never see, a truth that, when revealed, would shatter every cruel word thrown his way. That night, when the laughter of the wealthy had faded and the Grand Oak lobby was empty, Samuel Rivera rode the late bus back to his neighborhood on the edge of the city. The air smelled of diesel and fried food from street vendors, a stark contrast to the sterile fragrance of polished marble he left behind. His apartment building was old, the paint peeling from the walls, the staircase dimly lit by a single buzzing bulb. He climbed slowly to the third floor, his knees aching with every step. At the door, he fumbled with the keys, listening to the familiar creak of rusty hinges as he entered. Inside, the space was modest, a small living room with a sagging couch, a kitchen table covered with unopened bills, and a shelf holding a few photographs that meant more to him than any fortune ever could. Samuel set his mop bucket in the corner, poured water into a chipped mug, and sat at the table. On the refrigerator, secured with worn-out magnets, hung an old black-and-white photograph. In it, a much younger Samuel stood proudly in front of a glass building, dressed not in a janitor's uniform, but in a crisp suit and tie. Beside him were several other men, all in suits, their smiles wide and confident. Samuel's eyes in the photo were sharp, filled with the fire of ambition. He stared at it for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. His hand reached for the frame, fingers tracing the faded edges. A memory surfaced, conference rooms filled with voices, documents spread across glossy tables, his name printed at the top of contracts. It had been a different life. one carefully hidden beneath the mask of a janitor. But that night, the sting of Jason Miller's words pressed hard against Samuel's chest. Men like me build towers. Men like you clean up after us. The irony almost made him laugh. Jason, the man who boasted of closing million-dollar deals, had no idea who he was mocking. No idea what kind of towers Samuel himself had once helped to build. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't peace. It was the weight of secrets. Secrets that he kept buried, because to reveal them would change everything. And Samuel wasn't ready. Not yet. Across the room, a clock ticked steadily. The night stretched on, and Samuel sat in the dim light, torn between the life he had and the life he once knew. Outside, the city moved restlessly. But inside, Samuel whispered a promise to himself. One day, the truth will come out. 2 weeks later, a notice was pinned to the polished bulletin board in the lobby of Grand Oak Residences. Mandatory residence meeting, Friday, 7 p.m. conference room. For most of the wealthy tenants, it was nothing more than another chance to complain about minor inconveniences while sipping complimentary wine. For Samuel Rivera, it meant extra work, setting up chairs, preparing the projector, and making sure everything looked flawless before the elite gathered. On Friday evening, Samuel moved quietly through the conference room, arranging rows of sleek leather chairs under the bright fluorescent lights. His uniform was clean but faded, his hands careful as he straightened each chair. He avoided eye contact with the residents who arrived early, many of whom barely acknowledged his presence. At exactly 7:15, Mr. Clark, the condo manager, entered with his usual air of authority. In his 50s, with thinning hair combed neatly back and a permanent crease of disapproval etched into his forehead, Clark was more concerned with keeping the residents happy than treating his staff with respect. "All right, everyone, let's settle down," he announced, adjusting his tie. "We have a few issues to discuss tonight. First on the list, maintenance concerns." His eyes slid toward Samuel, who stood silently near the back of the room, ready to help with any technical issue. Before Clark could continue, Jason Miller raised his hand with an exaggerated wave. "Yes, I have a concern," Jason said, his voice dripping with mock seriousness. "Our janitor here seems to enjoy leaving streaks on the lobby floor. I nearly slipped in front of Mrs. Langley the other night. Isn't that right, Mrs. Langley?" Mrs. Langley, never one to miss an opportunity to insert herself, gave a dramatic gasp. "Oh, yes, I do remember nearly tripping. Imagine if I had fallen." Laughter erupted around the room. A few residents shook their heads, chuckling at the supposed incompetence of Samuel. Samuel tightened his grip on the projector remote, his knuckles white. He had mopped that lobby 3 times that evening, making sure it was spotless. The accusation wasn't just unfair. It was humiliating. Mr. Clark frowned, but not at Jason. Instead, he turned his gaze on Samuel. "Samuel, if residents are complaining about safety hazards, I suggest you double-check your work. We cannot afford carelessness here at Grand Oak." Jason smirked, satisfied with the response. "There you have it," he said, spreading his arms as if he had won some great debate. The laughter grew louder, filling the sleek room with echoes of arrogance. Samuel lowered his eyes, swallowing the anger burning in his chest. He wanted to shout the truth, to tell them who he really was, what he had accomplished before this uniform. But instead, he said quietly, "Yes, sir. I'll be more careful." The words tasted bitter, but Samuel had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the strongest armor. As the meeting dragged on, complaints piled up. The pool water wasn't warm enough, the valet took too long, the mailroom lighting felt a bit dim. To Samuel, each complaint was a reminder of the gulf between his world and theirs. But as he left the room later that night, carrying the stack of empty wine glasses and discarded papers, he caught Jason's mocking voice echoing again. Men like him should be grateful they even get to stand in this room. Samuel paused in the hallway, his jaw clenched. His reflection in the glass door stared back at him. Weary eyes, bent shoulders, a man dismissed as nothing. But behind that reflection was a truth none of them had guessed. And the day was coming when the balance of power in Grand Oak would shift. The night after the residents' meeting, Samuel Rivera couldn't sleep. He lay on his small couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the buzz of the old refrigerator and the far-off siren of an ambulance slicing through the city. Jason Miller's words still stung in his ears. Men like me build towers. Men like you clean up after us. Near midnight, Samuel sat up and crossed the room to a narrow bookshelf. Hidden behind a row of mismatched paperbacks was a flat metal box, scuffed at the corners. He pulled it free, set it on the table, and turned the tiny key he kept on a string around his neck. The lid creaked open. Inside lay documents wrapped in a manila envelope, blueprints rolled and secured with a rubber band long past its prime, and a newspaper clipping yellowed with time. Samuel unfolded the clipping first, smoothing it gently. The headline read, "Grand Oak Residences Breaks Ground." A new era of luxury living below the headline. A black and white photo captured a moment from years ago. Executives in suits smiling, shovels in hand, the ceremonial first dig. On the far right stood a younger Samuel. No uniform, no mop, no bent shoulders. His suit fit perfectly then. His eyes were bright, steady, ambitious. The caption listed 3 names. Samuel's wasn't one of them. He didn't need the caption to remember. He could still hear the speech from that day, word for word, promises about community, craftsmanship, long-term stewardship. He remembered signing early agreements in a cramped office, running numbers deep into the night, the taste of cheap coffee and the rush of possibility. He remembered Eduardo Salazar, his friend and mentor, who had first said, "You have an eye for building, Sam. Not just the numbers, the bones of the thing. You see how it stands." They had started as a small partnership, Rivera and Salazar Development, taking a gamble on a plot of land others said was too complicated, the soil too stubborn, the permits a maze. Samuel had spent months on site with boots in the mud, talking to foremen at dawn and engineers at midnight. He didn't just build the idea of Grand Oak, he helped build the foundation beneath it. He set the clipping aside and unrolled the blueprints. The edges were frayed, the ink faded, but his notes, a neat, steady hand, marched along the margins. Load calculations, drainage adjustments, cost-saving rebar specs that wouldn't compromise safety. On the lower corner, a tiny stamp read R&S Dev. He traced it with his thumb. From the envelope, he pulled a stapled stack of shareholder agreements. Names, percentages, dates. There it was in black ink. Samuel A. Rivera, founding partner, 18%. Another sheet, later in time, carried a different weight. Assignment of units, temporary. A short-term transfer executed the year his wife Elena fell ill. Hospital bills mounted faster than he could negotiate. The terms had been clear. Temporary until the company reached a threshold return, then his units would be restored under a clause Eduardo had insisted they add. Samuel closed his eyes. He could still see Elena's smile, the brave way she pretended to fear nothing, the way she squeezed his hand before a surgery and whispered, "Come back to me." Elena didn't. And when grief hollowed him out, business vultures circled. Eduardo died suddenly the following year, a stroke no one saw coming, and the board reshuffled. A new investor group slid in under the banner Miller Capital Holdings. Promises of liquidity came with revisions Samuel never approved. Meetings were moved, votes recorded in his absence. He was assured it was all procedural, that his temporary assignment would be restored as soon as the books cleared. The books never cleared. The door, once held open for him, slowly closed. He flipped to the last page, a notarized letter from Miller Capital after the tower's completion. "We appreciate your early contributions, Mr. Rivera. Unfortunately, due to market conditions and restructuring, reinstatement is not feasible at this time. We wish you the best." Samuel's jaw tightened. They had removed his name from press releases, scrubbed him from public photos, and turned him into a rumor, a ghost behind a glass monument. The phone on the table vibrated, startling him. An email notification blinked on the cracked screen. From Grace Thompson, Eskin subject line, update on clause 7.3. He stared at it. For months, Grace, a corporate attorney who had once handled permits for Rivera and Salazar, had been quietly digging for him, pulling filings, comparing board minutes, tracing signatures. She believed there was one clause they had overlooked when they tried to erase him, a clause that Eduardo had tucked into the original shareholder agreement. Samuel opened the email. It was brief. "Sam, court posted the decision tonight. Clause 7.3 stands. The board's restructuring breached the reinstatement terms after the threshold was met. You are entitled to restoration of your original units plus voting rights, effective immediately. I need you in my office at 9 a.m. Come as you are. Grace." He read it twice, then a third time, breath shallow, the words sinking into his bones. Clause 7.3 stands. Restoration, voting rights, effective immediately. He pulled another document from the bottom of the box, the original cover letter Eduardo had handed him years ago, back when the future felt wide open. In the margin, Eduardo had scribbled a note in blue ink. "You always build for the long term, Sam, even when they forget your name." Samuel set the papers down and stared at his own hands. These were the hands that had learned to hold a mop after they had held contracts. The hands that kept floors clean in a building he'd once helped will into existence. The hands that had buried a wife and kept moving, one quiet step at a time. A bus hissed to a stop outside. Somewhere, a neighbor laughed at a TV show. The world went on, unaware that a lever had just clicked into place. He closed the metal box and slipped the key back onto the string around his neck. Then he stood, walked to the mirror by the door, and looked at the man everyone ignored. The tired uniform, the gray at his temples, the back bent by grief and years. For the first time in a long time, his reflection didn't feel like a defeat. It felt like camouflage. "Tomorrow," he whispered to the empty room, "we start reclaiming what was mine." Outside, dawn had not yet touched the sky. Inside, something brighter had already come back to life. Because truths buried under glass don't disappear. They wait. And when the time is right, they rise. The following morning, Samuel Rivera dressed in the same faded uniform he always wore. To anyone watching, he looked like a janitor on his way to another day of silent labor. But under the fabric of that worn-out shirt, his chest carried a weight of anticipation he hadn't felt in decades. He boarded the 7:15 bus, gripping the rail as the vehicle lurched forward. Around him, workers in construction helmets and office clerks scrolled through their phones. Nobody noticed the man staring out the window, his mind replaying the words from the email. Clause 7.3 stands. You are entitled to restoration of your original units, plus voting rights, effective immediately. By the time the bus rattled into the city's financial district, Samuel's palms were damp. He walked slowly, blending with the morning rush until he reached a glass building with the name Thompson and Green LLP etched in silver on the door. Inside, the receptionist barely looked up before directing him to the 12th floor. Samuel rode the elevator in silence, the faint music almost mocking in its cheerfulness. When the doors opened, he stepped into a sleek lobby where Grace Thompson herself was waiting. Grace was in her 40s, sharp-eyed behind thin-framed glasses, her dark hair pulled neatly into a bun. Unlike the residents of Grand Oak, she didn't glance at Samuel's uniform with disdain. Instead, she extended a firm hand. "Sam, it's done. Come inside." Her office was lined with shelves of heavy legal volumes, the air smelling faintly of leather and coffee. She motioned for him to sit while sliding a thick folder across the desk. "This is the court's confirmation. Clause 7.3 was valid. The board overstepped when they restructured. Your 18% stake in Grand Oak is reinstated, effective as of last night. That means voting rights, profit shares, everything." Samuel opened the folder. His name stared back at him in bold print. Samuel A. Rivera. Founding partner, 18%. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Years of silence, humiliation, and invisibility pressed against his chest, threatening to break through. Grace leaned forward. "You don't have to stay in the shadows anymore. You have the law on your side now. But you need to decide what comes next. Do you want to negotiate quietly or make a statement?" Samuel closed the folder, his hands steady now. "For years they laughed at me. They erased my name from the very building I helped create. I stayed quiet because I thought dignity meant keeping peace. But now they're going to remember." Grace studied him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Then we'll make sure they do. The board is meeting next Thursday. I'll get you on the agenda. When you walk into that room, they won't see a janitor. They'll see exactly who you are." Samuel stood, the faded blue uniform hanging loosely from his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he felt taller. He extended his hand to Grace. "Thank you for believing Clause 7.3 mattered." Grace shook it firmly. "It wasn't just a clause. It was your legacy. And legacies don't vanish. They wait for their moment." As Samuel stepped out of the office and onto the bustling city street, he glanced at the tower in the distance. Grand Oak residences rose above the skyline, glass glittering in the morning sun. To its residents, it was just another luxury high-rise. To Samuel, it was a monument carved out of his blood, sweat, and vision. And now, piece by piece, it was coming back to him. He whispered under his breath, his voice lost in the noise of traffic but steady with resolve. "Next Thursday, Jason Miller will laugh for the last time." By the time Samuel Rivera returned to Grand Oak residences, the sun was sinking low, casting long golden beams through the tall glass windows of the lobby. He pushed his mop bucket across the polished floor, the familiar squeak of the wheels echoing softly. To everyone watching, it was just another evening, the janitor doing his job. But Samuel carried a secret that burned hotter than the sunset outside. At the reception desk, Mr. Clark was leaning back in his chair, reading over a set of invoices. His tie was slightly loosened, his thinning hair shining under the fluorescent lights. He glanced at Samuel and gave a dismissive wave. "Samuel, make sure you handle the trash on the West Wing tonight. Residents are complaining again, and for heaven's sake, don't take all night. People are starting to think you enjoy hanging around here." Samuel said nothing. He simply nodded and pushed the bucket toward the elevator. Silence had always been his shield. From the side entrance, Jason Miller strutted in, talking loudly on his phone. His laugh carried across the lobby like a performance meant for an audience. Spotting Samuel, he ended his call abruptly, a grin spreading across his face. "Well, if it isn't Grand Oak's mascot," Jason announced. How's the mop treating you, Sam? Getting a promotion anytime soon? Maybe they'll let you polish the boardroom table next." A few residents nearby chuckled, shaking their heads. Jason loved an audience, and Samuel had always been the easiest target. Mr. Clark joined in with a smirk. "Careful, Jason. Don't give him ideas. The last thing we need is Samuel thinking he belongs anywhere near the boardroom." The laughter grew louder, filling the elegant lobby with arrogance and disdain. Samuel stood there for a moment, his mop handle resting against his shoulder. His eyes lifted, steady and calm, meeting Jason's for the first time without flinching. Jason tilted his head, the grin faltering just slightly. "What? Did I say something funny?" Samuel didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked toward the elevator, the bucket squeaking softly behind him. His silence unsettled Jason in a way words never could. As the doors closed, Jason muttered to Clark, "Strange man. Doesn't even know when he's being put in his place." Clark chuckled, returning to his paperwork. "Don't worry, some men are born to mop floors. That's all he'll ever be." But high above them, in Samuel's small locker in the janitor's closet, a folder now rested on the top shelf. Inside were the court papers bearing his name, stamped and sealed with the weight of the law. Documents that proved Mr. Samuel A. Rivera wasn't just the janitor of Grand Oak, he was one of its founders. And next Thursday, when the board gathered in the room Jason joked about, the truth would come crashing down like a storm none of them saw coming. Thursday evening dressed the city in glass and gold. From the outside, the Grand Oak Residence's boardroom looked like a crystal box suspended above the lobby. Frosted panels, a long walnut table, leather chairs that whispered money and certainty. Inside, certainty was exactly what Jason Miller brought with him. Jason adjusted his cufflinks, his reflection sharp in the black mirror of the boardroom TV. "Let's make this quick," he said, dropping into a chair as if it were a throne. "I have dinner at 8. Mr. Clark, the building manager, hovered near the door with a stack of reports tucked under his arm. He nodded to the directors as they filed in. Elaine Park, head of finances, calm as calculator glass. Victor Alvarez, construction consultant, perpetually unimpressed. Marilyn Cole, the HOA president, all pearls and posture. "We'll start with maintenance," Elaine said, sliding a folder across the table. "Resident complaints have increased." Jason raised a hand. "Then replace the janitor. Problem solved." Clark pressed his lips together, satisfied. "I couldn't agree more. He's slow, always lurking in the lobby. Gives the wrong impression." Before Elaine could respond, the glass door opened. The room turned as one. Samuel Rivera stepped inside. He wore the same faded navy blue uniform, the same scuffed work shoes, his hands clean, his posture steady. He carried no mop, no bucket, only a thin folder held against his side. For a breath, nobody spoke. The air seemed to tighten around the long table. Jason blinked, then smiled as if someone had just told a bad joke. "Sir, I think sanitation meets downstairs," he said, the words bright with humiliation, dressed as humor. Laughter fluttered at the edges of the room. Samuel didn't move. "I'm here for the board meeting." Clark let out a soft scoff. "You're not authorized to be here, Samuel. This is a restricted session." From the hallway, footsteps approached, quick, precise. The door swung wider and Grace Thompson entered, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Her eyes swept the table, then settled on Elaine Park. "Good evening," Grace said, voice cool. "Grace Thompson, counsel for Mr. Samuel A. Rivera. I believe you received my notice placing him on tonight's agenda." Elaine folded her hands. "We received documents." Her gaze slipped to Jason. "But we hadn't confirmed." Grace placed 2 copies of a court order on the table, the paper crisp, the seal unmistakable. Confirmation came from the court. Clause 7.3 stands. Mr. Rivera's stake and voting rights have been restored, effective last week. Jason's laugh was a crack of glass. Voting rights? For the janitor? He looked around, inviting agreement. This is absurd. Victor Alvarez leaned forward, reading. The room quieted as the legal words sank in like cold water. Restoration of 18% founding units, full voting privileges reinstated, notice to board, immediate compliance required. Clark tried again, fingers whitening around his reports. This is highly irregular. He can't just... He can, Grace said, turning to him. And he will, or this meeting becomes a deposition. Samuel stepped further into the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He simply pulled a chair from the wall and sat at the end of the table. The leather sighed. The silence deepened. Elaine cleared her throat, composure returning. Mr. Rivera, if the court has ruled, you have a seat. She glanced at Jason. We proceed. Jason leaned back, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. By all means, let's proceed. Grace took a seat behind Samuel, opening her portfolio. Samuel placed his thin folder on the table and slid out a single photograph, the groundbreaking shot of Grand Oak, executives with shovels, the ceremonial dirt. On the far right, a younger Samuel in a fitted suit, eyes bright. He laid the photo in the middle of the table. I helped build this place, Samuel said softly. Not just the lobby floors, the foundation, the financing, the first model that proved we could stand a tower here at all. Marilyn Cole frowned at the photograph, then at Samuel. Why wasn't your name erased? Samuel finished, turning to her. Restructured, deferred. Pick whatever word was fashionable in the emails. Elaine skimmed Grace's copies, then opened the financials. If the court restored your units, it means you were never truly out, which means board decisions over the last year without your vote are exposed. Jason's jaw tightened. Let's not be dramatic. Victor tapped a pen against the table. If there were votes taken without a rightful board member, those minutes can be challenged. He flipped pages, including the contract to offload maintenance to Miller Facilities Group at a premium. Elaine's eyes lifted. Jason, that's your subsidiary. Jason smiled again, wider. Because we provide quality. Samuel's voice remained even. You provide invoices. Grace slid another paper forward. We'll be requesting a review of MFG's bidding process and deliverables. Irregularities may require reimbursement. Clark shifted in his chair. This is ridiculous. He mops floors. That's not a board-level qualification. Elaine's gaze cooled. Qualifications are in the operating agreement, not your feelings, Mr. Clark. Jason drummed fingers against polished wood, then stood, palms flat on the table. Let's cut through theater. Perhaps the court has opinions. But here, we run a building. We keep it profitable. We keep residents happy. And no resident is going to feel happy with a janitor sitting at the board table. Samuel met his eyes. Then they need to learn what happiness is built on. The room held still. Elaine closed her folder. We have two paths, she said. We can implement the court order, review decisions taken without Mr. Rivera's vote, and proceed with proper governance. Or we can fight a losing battle and bleed in legal fees while residents read about it in the paper. Marilyn shifted, pearl necklace catching the light. I vote we comply. Victor nodded. Same. All eyes swung to Jason, his smile thinned to a line. Fine, he said. We comply. But let's be clear. He pointed down the table. I don't care what paper you bring. A man in a janitor's uniform will never run this board. Samuel didn't blink. I didn't come here to run it. I came to clean it. The words hung there, simple and heavy. Elaine tapped the gavel she didn't actually have. Then let's start. First motion. Suspend pending payments to Miller Facilities Group until we complete an independent audit. Grace looked at Samuel. He inclined his head. Seconded, he said. Jason laughed without humor. Of course you seconded. And I vote yes, Marilyn said. Victor raised a hand. Yes. Elaine looked up. Motion passes. Her pen moved across the page, the ink a quiet verdict. Jason's nostrils flared. This is a witch hunt. It's a housekeeping, Samuel said. I'm good at those. A vein in Jason's temple ticked. You think this ends here? You'll be back with your mop tomorrow morning, and I'll still be the one residents listen to. Samuel slid one final paper to the center, a copy for each board member. Item for new business, he said, calm as a closed door. A proposal to revise vendor protocols and on-site staff protections. Includes disciplinary procedures for harassment by residents or management. Clark straightened in his seat. What is that supposed to mean? Samuel didn't look at him. It means the lobby stops being a stage for cruelty, Grace added. And if anyone makes it one, there will be consequences. Elaine read quickly, then set the proposal down. We'll calendar it, she said. Next meeting. Jason's laugh was back, brittle. Calendar anything you like. He snatched his phone off the table. This farce is over. He turned to leave, just as the boardroom door opened again. Mrs. Langley stepped in, not with her jeweled poodle this time, but with a paper in her trembling hand. Behind her stood two residents and the evening doorman, Luis, his face pale. Mrs. Langley, usually a parade of arrogance, looked afraid. Excuse me, she said, voice wavering. There's been an incident in the lobby. Elaine stood. What kind of incident? Luis swallowed. A resident's child slipped near the west wing and hit his head. We called an ambulance. The mother is saying the floor was left wet and unmarked. His eyes flicked to Mr. Clark. Clark blanched. That's impossible. I told Samuel to... Samuel looked at Luis, gentle. Was the wet floor sign up? Luis shook his head. No, sir. The signs were in the supply closet. Mr. Clark asked me to move them to storage last week for the photo shoot. A silence like black ice covered the table. Mrs. Langley's hand trembled. The mother is threatening to sue. She's downstairs right now. Elaine turned slowly to Jason and Clark. We'll reconvene in 5 minutes, she said, words clipped. Mr. Clark, stay. Jason scoffed, reaching for the door. I'm not... Jason, Elaine said without raising her voice. Sit down. He froze, the command settling over the room like a new weather system. Samuel rose, the uniform suddenly looking less like cloth and more like quiet armor. He picked up his folder and the old photograph. At the door, he paused and looked back down the table, at Jason's tight jaw, at Clark's paling forehead, at Elaine's steady pen. For years, he said, you told me I didn't belong in this room. He glanced toward the lobby below. But every mess you made started on a floor I had already cleaned. Then he stepped into the hallway, where the echo of an ambulance siren curled up from the street, and the murmur of frightened residents rippled through the glass. Some truths arrive in court orders. Others arrive on stretchers. Either way, they arrive. The lobby of Grand Oak Residences was nothing like its usual picture of perfection. The glass doors stood open, cold night air rushing in as anxious residents crowded around. The sharp wail of an ambulance siren grew louder until red and blue lights splashed against the marble walls. On the floor near the west wing, a little boy sat dazed, blood trickling from a small cut on his forehead. His mother, Angela Torres, knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed a tissue to the wound. Her eyes darted between her son and the gathering crowd, rage tightening her voice. This place is supposed to be safe. How do you let a child slip on your floor?" The words ricocheted off the walls, heavy with accusation. Residents murmured, some nodding, others whispering blame. Luis, the evening doorman, stood near the elevator, guilt written across his face. "Mr." Clark rushed down the staircase, sweat beading on his forehead. "What's going on here?" he demanded, though the panic in his tone betrayed that he already knew. Angela's voice sharpened. "What's going on? My son slipped because there were no wet floor signs. None! I could sue this building for negligence." Clark's eyes flicked nervously to the corners of the lobby. "That's absurd. We always have signage." Luis stepped forward, voice low but clear. "No, sir. The signs were moved to storage last week, by your order." The crowd hushed. Dozens of eyes swung toward Clark, whose jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before he stammered, "That's not relevant. What matters is—" "What matters," another voice interrupted, deep and steady, "is the truth." The crowd parted slightly as Samuel Rivera stepped into the lobby. He carried no mop, no bucket, only the quiet weight of presence. His faded uniform looked almost out of place among the chaos, yet every eye found him. Clark's voice cracked. "Samuel, this doesn't concern you." But Angela turned sharply. "Doesn't concern him? My son's injury doesn't concern the man who cleans these floors?" Her voice trembled with fury. "Maybe if people listened to him instead of laughing at him, this wouldn't have happened." A gasp rippled through the residence. Samuel knelt beside the boy, his movements careful, his voice gentle. "Hey, champ," he said softly. "Stay still for me. You're going to be all right. The paramedics will check you soon." His hands were steady, practiced, hands that had carried not only buckets and mops, but contracts, blueprints, and responsibilities greater than anyone in that lobby imagined. The boy blinked at him through watery eyes, then gave the faintest nod. Jason Miller finally appeared, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble as he descended the stairs with deliberate calm. "What a scene," he muttered, "all because of a janitor who doesn't do his job properly." The words cut through the crowd. For a moment, silence held, and then Angela rose, her voice fierce. "Don't you dare blame him. My boy slipped because of negligence higher up, and everyone here knows it. Luis just said it. Clark ordered the signs removed." Murmurs turned into open voices now, residents pointing, accusing. Clark paled, tugging at his tie. Jason lifted his hands in mock surrender, but the sneer never left his lips. Samuel stood slowly, his shoulders straight, his eyes calm. He didn't shout, didn't accuse. Instead, he looked around the lobby, at Angela clutching her son, at Luis trembling with truth, at the faces of residents who had mocked him for years. "I've mopped these floors for nearly a decade," he said softly, but every syllable carried. "Not once did I ever leave them unsafe. The only mess I couldn't clean was the arrogance that thought some lives mattered more than others." The sirens cut off as the ambulance doors opened and paramedics rushed inside. The boy was lifted carefully onto a stretcher, his mother following close behind. The glass doors closed, leaving behind a lobby full of silence, tension, and eyes suddenly unwilling to meet Samuel's. Jason broke the silence with a laugh too sharp, too brittle. "Touching speech, janitor." "But words don't change." Elaine Park's voice sliced across the lobby. She had arrived quietly with Marilyn and Victor from the boardroom upstairs, documents still in hand. Her gaze was icy as she fixed on Clark and Jason. "Actually, words backed by legal rights change everything." She turned to the residents. "You should all know, as of last week, Mr. Rivera isn't just your janitor. He is a founding partner of Grand Oak. And after tonight's incident, his voice on this board will be the one holding people accountable. The lobby erupted in gasps, whispers tumbling over each other. Mrs. Langley clutched her pearls. Jason's smirk faltered, his face flushing with shock. Clark stammered, reaching for words that refused to come. Samuel didn't move. He simply stood in the center of it all, steady as stone, as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. For a long, heavy moment, the lobby of Grand Oak Residences felt like it had stopped breathing. The chandelier's light glinted off marble floors, but all eyes were fixed on Samuel Rivera, standing tall in his faded uniform, and on Elaine Park's words echoing in their ears: founding partner, voting rights, accountability. Mrs. Langley's jeweled fingers trembled as she clutched her poodle tighter. The dog squirmed, sensing her unease. "A founding partner?" she whispered, her voice thin. But he carries a mop." "Carried dignity long before that mop," murmured Angela Torres, still shaken but fierce after her son was taken into the ambulance. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her voice carried across the lobby. "You all laughed at him, mocked him, and all this time he built the very walls you're living behind." The crowd shifted, the arrogance that once filled the lobby dissolving into whispers tinged with regret. A young couple glanced at each other uneasily, remembering the times they had dropped trash deliberately for Samuel to pick up. One of the teenage boys who had filmed him before lowered his phone now, shame burning his cheeks. Marilyn Cole, pearls gleaming against her dark blouse, stepped forward. "Mr. Rivera," she said, her voice steady though her eyes softened. "On behalf of the board, I offer my apology for the disrespect you've endured here. It should never have happened." Her words cracked something open. One by one, voices followed. "I'm sorry," muttered a man near the elevators. "We didn't know," whispered another woman, her head bowed. Luis, the doorman, spoke louder than the rest, his voice breaking with sincerity. I owe you an apology, sir. I should have stood up for you sooner." Samuel didn't bask in their remorse. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply nodded once, his eyes scanning the faces that had once looked past him as though he were invisible. Jason Miller's laugh shattered the fragile moment. It was sharp, dismissive, desperate. "Oh, come on. Are we really rewriting history here? A janitor is suddenly a hero because of some old paperwork? Don't fool yourselves. This building runs on money, not pity, and money answers to me." But this time his voice didn't carry the same power. His words fell flat against the shifting tide. Residents didn't laugh with him. They looked away. Even Mrs. Langley, still clutching her pearls, avoided his gaze. Elaine Park turned to Jason, her tone cool as polished steel. "Money answers to contracts, Mr. Miller, and the contracts say Samuel Rivera is back on this board with 18%. You may want to adjust to that reality." Jason's jaw tightened, the smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: vulnerability. Samuel stepped forward, his hands relaxed at his sides. His voice was calm, but it filled the room. "I never asked for applause. I never asked for pity. All I ever wanted was respect, not just for me, but for every person who works in these halls. The doormen, the cleaners, the staff you look past every day. Without them, your marble floors, your glass walls, your luxury would collapse." A murmur of agreement rose from the residents, quiet but undeniable. The atmosphere had shifted. The man they once mocked was no longer invisible. He was unavoidable. Jason opened his mouth to retort, but the sound of the ambulance pulling away outside silenced him. Its fading siren carried a truth louder than his arrogance. Some things were bigger than money, bigger than ego. Samuel turned his gaze toward the glass doors. His reflection stared back at him, still in a janitor's uniform, but no longer the shadow of a man. Now, he was the foundation, revealed at last. Later that night, the glow of the city reflected coldly off the glass windows of Jason Miller's penthouse. Inside, the luxury apartment was a monument to excess. Marble countertops, rare paintings, and a balcony overlooking the skyline like a throne above peasants. Jason paced the living room, his phone pressed tight to his ear. The arrogance he had flaunted in the lobby was gone, replaced by sharp frustration. "You don't understand," he hissed. "If Rivera's claim holds, he has 18%. That's a swing vote. He can block contracts, demand audits, he can expose everything." On the other end of the line, silence stretched. Then a man's voice replied coolly, "Then make sure he doesn't." Jason slammed a hand against the glass wall, his reflection sneering back at him. He's been mopping floors for 10 years. He should have stayed in his place. Instead, he shows up with some lawyer and a piece of paper, and suddenly everyone treats him like a king. He swallowed hard, the taste of bitterness thick on his tongue. "If Elaine and the others rally behind him, my contracts with Miller Facilities Group are finished. Millions. Gone overnight." His reflection stared at him, unforgiving. For the first time, Jason felt cornered. Behind him, his teenage daughter, Sophia Miller, appeared in the doorway, her voice uncertain. "Dad, why are you yelling?" Jason turned sharply, his expression softening instantly, but his eyes betrayed the storm within. "Go to bed, Sophia. Grown-up business." Sophia lingered, frowning. "I saw Mr. Rivera today. People were being mean to him, but he was kind. He helped Mrs. Torres's boy before the ambulance came. Why do they all hate him?" Jason's jaw clenched. "Because he doesn't belong here." But the words felt thinner now, even to him. Sophia tilted her head, studying her father with quiet disappointment. "Maybe he belongs more than you think." She turned and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Jason alone with his anger. He dropped heavily into a leather chair, grabbing a glass of whiskey from the table. His mind raced. He couldn't silence Rivera legally. Grace had made sure of that. But reputation was fragile. Jason's eyes narrowed as an idea took shape. If he couldn't erase Samuel's rights, maybe he could turn public opinion against him. A smear campaign, rumors whispered into the right ears, carefully placed stories to paint Samuel as unstable, dishonest, dangerous. He took a long sip of whiskey, the burn steadying his pulse. "If the janitor wants to play founder," he muttered to the empty room, "then he'd better be ready for war." Outside, thunder rumbled across the skyline, as though the city itself knew a storm was brewing. Not just in the skies, but in the halls of Grand Oak. The next morning, whispers began curling through the polished corridors of Grand Oak residences like smoke slipping under doors. At the cafe down the block, 2 residents leaned close over cappuccinos. "They say Rivera isn't stable," one whispered. "I heard he only pushed into the board to get money," the other replied, eyes wide. "And what about his wife? Didn't she—" Her voice trailed off, the rest lost in hushed tones and raised brows. By lunchtime, the gossip had multiplied. Posts appeared on the residents' private forum. "Who is Samuel Rivera, really? Do we want a janitor making decisions about our investments?" One anonymous comment read, "Men like that can't be trusted with power. He's hiding something." Behind it all was Jason Miller, pulling strings like a puppeteer. He fed half-truths to a handful of residents, exaggerated moments of silence into stories of instability, turned Samuel's humility into supposed weakness. Jason was relentless, his reputation and money on the line. But not everyone bought the story. That afternoon, in the quiet of the lobby, Sophia Miller lingered near the reception desk. She was only 16, still half a child, but old enough to see through masks her father wore. Her eyes followed Samuel as he pushed his mop across the floor, slow and steady. He paused, leaning on the handle for a moment, and Sophia caught the faint weariness in his face. Summoning courage, she stepped forward. "Mr. Rivera?" Samuel looked up, surprised. Few residents ever addressed him by name. He nodded politely. "Yes?" Sophia shifted awkwardly, twisting a bracelet around her wrist. "I just wanted to say thank you for helping that boy yesterday. You didn't panic. You knew what to do." Samuel's expression softened. Anyone would have done the same. She shook her head. "Not anyone. Most people just watched. But you cared." For a moment, Samuel saw not Jason Miller's daughter, but a young woman with eyes searching for truth. He offered a small smile. "Kindness isn't weakness, Sophia. Remember that." Her lips curved into a shy smile. "I will." From the mezzanine above, Jason's sharp gaze caught the exchange. His jaw tightened, hands gripping the railing. To him, this wasn't a moment of kindness. It was betrayal. His own daughter siding with the man he was trying to bury. That night, Jason poured more fuel on the fire. A new post appeared online. "Rivera doesn't belong here. How long before he drags this building down with him?" Attached was a blurry photo of Samuel in the janitor's closet, hunched over his cart. The caption read, "This is your new board member?" Dozens of comments followed, some mocking, some fearful. The smear campaign was working. Doubt was creeping back into the marble walls of Grand Oak. But in the silence of her bedroom, Sophia typed a different message into the same forum. "Maybe the problem isn't Mr. Rivera. Maybe the problem is how we treat people." She hit send, her hands trembling, but her heart steady. The next evening, the boardroom at Grand Oak Residences buzzed with tension. The long walnut table gleamed under recessed lights, but the polished surface couldn't disguise the storm building in the air. Elaine Park called the meeting to order, her voice calm but clipped. Beside her sat Victor Alvarez, flipping through the preliminary audit folder. Marilyn Cole arranged her pearls, expression unreadable. Jason Miller leaned back in his chair with a smirk plastered on his face, though his eyes flicked nervously to the papers spreading across the table. At the end of the row sat Samuel Rivera, still in his janitor's uniform. He hadn't changed it for the occasion. For him, the uniform was no longer a disguise, it was a statement. Elaine adjusted her glasses. "We'll begin with the audit Victor initiated. These are invoices submitted by Miller Facilities Group over the last 3 months." Victor cleared his throat. "I compared build hours to access logs, supply receipts, and staff schedules. What I found was troubling." He tapped the first page. "MFG billed 120 hours for HVAC maintenance in May. Logs show only 46 hours of actual technician access." A murmur rippled around the table. Elaine flipped to the next page. "June, billed 200 hours, logs 72. Marilyn leaned forward. "That's nearly triple." Jason's smirk stiffened. He raised a hand casually. "Let's not overreact. Anyone who's managed contracts knows there are lags in documentation. Technicians come and go. Paperwork piles up. It's clerical noise." Victor shook his head. "Then the noise is consistent. Supplies were billed at premium rates, yet purchase orders don't match. Cleaning solvents, basic tools, inflated 2 to 3 times market cost, and in some cases..." He turned a page. "Supplies weren't delivered at all." Elaine closed the folder sharply. "That is not clerical noise, Jason. That's fraud." Jason chuckled, though his eyes darted restless. "Fraud? Please, you think I'd risk my reputation on solvents and overtime hours? If anything, this shows we need a better accounting system, not accusations. Grace Thompson, seated quietly behind Samuel, spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, but it sliced clean. The system is fine. What's broken is the trust. These invoices didn't go through without signatures. Who signed them, Mr. Clark? All eyes turned to Mr. Clark, who sat pale and sweating near the door. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I reviewed them. Jason assured me they were standard. Elaine's gaze hardened. So either you were complicit or negligent. Which is it? Clark wilted in his chair. Samuel's voice broke through the noise, steady and unshaken. Numbers don't lie. They show patterns, and patterns show truth. For years you told me my place was in the shadows. But tonight, your numbers have dragged you into the light. Jason slammed his palm against the table. Enough with the poetry. This is business. You're not a board member, Rivera. You're a janitor playing dress-up in a courtroom's pity. Silence cut the room in half. Then Elaine spoke, each word deliberate. He is a board member, Jason, and right now, he's the only one at this table who seems to remember what integrity looks like. Marilyn nodded slowly. I agree. These discrepancies are serious. They threaten not just the finances, but the reputation of Grand Oak. Residents already know something is wrong. We can't bury this. Jason leaned back, trying to smirk again, but the cracks were visible now. Sweat glistened at his temples. His daughter's words from the night before, maybe he belongs more than you think, echoed in the silence he couldn't control. Elaine looked around the table. Motion, suspend Miller Facilities Group as vendor, pending full investigation and independent audit. Victor raised a hand. Seconded. All eyes turned to Samuel. Slowly, he raised his hand. In favor. Marilyn lifted hers. In favor. Elaine's hand joined theirs. Motion passes. Jason's mask shattered. His chair screeched against the floor as he stood, face red, jaw clenched. You think you've won? You don't know what this costs me. You don't know who you're dealing with. Samuel met his fury with calm. We're dealing with a man who forgot the foundation he was standing on. And foundations, Jason, they don't move for bluster. They only crack under lies. Jason's fists tightened at his sides, but words failed him. For the first time, the boardroom wasn't his stage. It belonged to the janitor who had once built it. Word traveled faster than the elevators at Grand Oak residences. By morning, residents already knew. The board had suspended Miller Facilities Group, an independent audit was underway, and Mr. Clark had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Someone taped a simple notice to the lobby pillar. Safety protocol in effect. Wet floor signage must remain in place. Vendor invoices subject to quarterly audit. Harassment policy applies to everyone. No logos, no signatures, just language that felt like structure. In the lobby, the mood had changed. Conversations were quieter, glances softer. Luis, the evening doorman, straightened the stack of visitor passes with new care, greeting staff by name. Mrs. Langley crossed to the desk, poodle tucked under her arm, and spoke softly. Good morning, Luis. She hesitated, then added, Thank you for yesterday. Luis looked up, surprised, then smiled. You're welcome, Mrs. Langley. At 10 sharp, Elaine Park stepped to the concierge stand with a microphone that fed into the lobby speakers. Residents gathered in small clusters. Angela Torres stood with her son, a thin butterfly bandage above his brow. Marilyn Cole and Victor Alvarez flanked Elaine, their faces composed. Good morning, Elaine began. We owe you clarity. Last night, the board voted to suspend our current facilities vendor and initiate an independent audit. We will publish the findings to residents. Effective immediately, the safety protocol posted here is active. And one more thing. She glanced to her left, then stepped aside. You deserve to hear directly from Mr. Samuel Rivera. For a beat, the lobby listened to its own heartbeat. Then Samuel walked forward in his faded Navy uniform, hands clean, posture steady. He didn't take the mic. His voice carried on its own. I've worked here almost 10 years, he said, looking not at the marble but at the faces. I've cleaned up spills. I've fixed stuck doors. I've fetched packages and found lost dogs. I've watched your kids pedal their first circles on the lobby tiles. He paused, a small, wry smile. I've also been insulted in this room, laughed at, filmed without my permission. That happened here too. A rustle of discomfort moved through the crowd. Samuel let it pass like weather. I didn't stay because I didn't have options, he continued. I stayed because buildings teach you what people forget. What lasts is not the shine, it's the structure. You can polish marble every day, and it will still crack if the foundation is wrong. Respect is the foundation. He lifted the printed page from the pillar, held it up. These 3 lines are not a speech. They're a start. We'll fail at them sometimes. We'll forget. And then we'll remember and try again until it becomes habit. He turned to Angela's son. How's the head? The boy grinned, small and brave. Better. Good, Samuel said. Safety first, always. A hand rose. Mr. Patel, calm as ever. Will you keep working here? He asked. As janitor? As board member? As both? Samuel's eyes warmed. As needed, he said. Titles aren't the work is the work. A soft ripple of laughter, this time without edges. From the back, a familiar voice cut in, stripped of its usual swagger. Jason Miller stood alone near the revolving door. No entourage, no performance. The smirk was gone. In its place, a face that had met a wall and discovered it was a mirror. I have something to say, Jason said, and a hush followed, wary and expectant. He swallowed. The audit will run its course. I won't interfere. If it shows what you think it will. He faltered, then forced the words out. I'll accept the consequences. No applause, no jeers, just silence that let the sentence sit where it belonged. Jason looked at Samuel. The 2 men regarded each other across the lobby, marble and glass catching the distance between them. I'm sorry, Jason said, the apology clipped but real. For what I said, for how I treated you. He glanced at Sophia, who stood a few steps away, hope flickering in her eyes. My daughter reminded me yesterday that belonging isn't a price point. I forgot that. Sophia exhaled, relief loosening her shoulders. Samuel nodded once. Thank you, he said, nothing triumphant in his tone. Let the audit speak. Then we fix what it reveals. Elaine cleared her throat. We'll update you within 2 weeks, she announced. Until then, we follow the protocol. If you see something unsafe, say something. If someone forgets a name, remind them. She set the mic down. The lobby eased back into motion, but not the same motion as before. Later that afternoon, Sophia approached Samuel at the supply closet, the one Jason had posted to mock him. She lingered at the threshold, then stepped inside, where shelves held neatly labeled bins. Signs, gloves, first aid. I wanted to help, she said, cheeks pink. Can I put the signs back out with you? Samuel studied her, and a smile touched his eyes. Of course. They walked the west wing together, placing bright yellow triangles where they belonged. Residents watched them, some curious, others quietly moved by the sight of the developer who had been a ghost, and the girl who chose to see him. By evening, the lobby reflected a different kind of polish. Luis had taped a small card to the concierge desk. Staff names today: Luis, Amara, Samuel. People actually read it. Mrs. Langley tried. Twice. In the boardroom upstairs, Grace Thompson packed her files. She paused at the doorway as Samuel stepped in to retrieve a forgotten folder. "You didn't chase a headline," Grace said. "You offered a policy." Samuel smiled gently. "Speech fades, procedure stays." Grace nodded. "Your friend Eduardo would have liked today." "He'd have marked the load-bearing lines with a blue pen," Samuel replied, eyes soft with memory. "Then told me to tighten the bolts." As night rolled over the city, the building seemed to exhale. The concierge light softened. Elevators hummed. Footfalls settled into an easy rhythm. You could almost hear the structure beneath the shine, the way a good frame hums when wind leans hard against glass. Samuel finished his shift late. He took the service elevator down, stepped into the cool night air, and looked up at Grand Oak, the tower he had once dreamed on paper, then learned to sweep in silence, and finally reclaimed with a claws and a quiet spine. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Audit team scheduled, Monday, 9 a.m. He typed back, "I'll be there." Then he slid the phone into his pocket and started walking. On the sidewalk, Sophia caught up to him, breathless. "Mr. Rivera, do you need a ride home?" He shook his head. "Thank you. I'll take the bus. Habit." She walked with him to the corner anyway. They waited under a streetlight that flickered once, then steadied. "Why didn't you tell everyone sooner?" she asked. "Because I wanted to know who they were when they thought I was no one," he said. "And because grief needed quiet." Sophia nodded, absorbing a lesson she would not forget. The bus arrived, doors sighing open. Before Samuel stepped on, he turned back to the tower, glass like water, steel like bone. Buildings are made of materials you can list on a permit. Communities are made of materials you can't. Apologies that land, procedures that hold, and people who decide to start seeing. The doors closed, the bus pulled away. In the lobby behind him, a yellow sign glowed under the chandelier. "Caution, wet floor. Please walk with care." For once, everyone did.